Welcome, Wayne, to this interview.
Thanks, Jack. Nice to be with you and nice to catch up after all this time. We've been trying to do this interview for at least nearly 2 years, is that right?
My oath. But we finally got here.
Yeah, we did.
Now, Wayne, you were born in Victoria and raised on a dairy farm. Whereabouts?
Benalla. It's in the northeast of Victoria, and in fact the farm was sort of halfway between Benalla and Mansfield. So the little, I suppose you'd call it a village called Lima, so not too far from Swamppool. That's where the general store was. Yeah, and we had a farm there, 220 acres, and it was a dairy farm. So Mum and Dad milked cows all their life, and of course I had to help with the cows as well.
I assume, apart from schooling and chores around the farm, you were listening to country music and also fascinated about yodeling.
Yes, I must admit, the yodeling was something I did get fascinated with. One of the farmers down the road from us had an old, well, we had a gramophone as well, but the farmer down the road, Jimmy S and I had a gramophone. He had lots of 78s all stacked up down there, and in amongst them there was all these Wolf Carter, Tex Morton, Buddy Williams 78s. So I'd wind up the gramophone, and Dad might be down there helping do some farming work, and I'd be in the junk room there playing all these old records, and the yodeling was absolutely fascinating. I just couldn't believe the sound that they made. So I always thought to myself back then, that's something I would love to be able to do one day.
How old were you when you learned to play guitar?
I was probably about 7 years old when I first picked up a guitar, and that was down at another neighbour's house, just down the road a little bit from our farm. And it was an old guitar in a junk room. Only had about 5 strings on it, and I sat out on the veranda. I can remember doing that and strumming away, not knowing what I was doing. But so I was probably 7 years old, and then when I was 8, Dad got me my very first guitar. It was an Echo guitar. I think it was 13 guineas it cost. And Dad bought that for me from Wangaratta, and so that's where it sort of started. And I just I loved the music that I hear on the radio and on the old 78 records, and country music was sort of filtered in amongst the pop songs at that stage, you know, on the radio. So I just knew that I liked the country music songs more than anything else.
And I believe that your first performances were asked by a neighbour or something like that to appear in functions?
Oh yes, well there was a lot of cousins and neighbours lived around the district there of Lima, so I think my very first performance on stage was a cousin's 21st birthday party, and I think I was only 8 years old. I forget what song I may have sung, but I just learned some chords on the guitar, and it sort of went from there. But Dad always encouraged me, if we had visitors to the farm on a Sunday afternoon, to get the guitar and sing a couple of songs, whether it was auntie or some cousins arrived. And you know, gradually that just got rid of my nerves that I might have had, and encouraged me to sing in front of people, and that was the best thing I could have done.
And what was the first song that you learnt on the guitar?
Probably Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley. I think it only had
an old favourite.
Had 2 chords in it. You know, Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley. 2 chords in it, and so I handled that okay. And after that, I can't remember exactly what I learnt, but there was a lot of songs.
But Dooley, Tom Dooley was the first.
It would have been the first, I think. Yes, yeah.
And we might be jumping a little bit here, but you did make an appearance on a popular GMV junior show.
Oh yes, we haven't jumped too far. So so I went to school at Lima State School up until I was 11 years old, and then went to Benalla Technical School. So there was only, at the little Lima school, there was only 7 kids when I was in grade 6. So it was only a small one-room school, a bit like Little House on the Prairie that you used to see on television. And Benalla Technical School had 500 kids. So, but in my class, well, they had a music class. It was all boys school. It wasn't co-ed back then. It was all guys. And so in my music class one day, when we'd just all started, none of the other kids were interested in music, but the teacher, Mr. Butterworth, said, "Is anyone in the class musical?" And of course, one of my mates from Lima East, Billy Matheson, said, He can sing and play the guitar, and there was a guitar laying on top of the piano. So the kids all, of course, encouraged me to get up and sing a song. So I did. I sang Jamaican Farewell.
Oh, yeah.
In the key of D. I can remember doing that quite plain. And Mr. Butterworth was an old English guy, and he was very impressed. And he said, would you like to go on television? And I said, oh yes, please, that would be great. And he said, I've got a friend called Wally McQuaker that works at GMV6 at Shepparton, and his other role over there, of course, is Joey the Clown. Well, I knew who Joey the Clown was. I couldn't believe it. And within a few days, Wally McQuaker had phoned me and invited me over to make an appearance on the GMV Junior show. And then over the years, I did that, as often as we could fit me in, and other special shows they did. And they used to sometimes travel and do different towns with the GMV Junior show. So we'd go to Deniliquin, and I think we did Mansfield, I think Albury, Euroa, all different places. And of course Dad would run me to wherever I had to go because I was too young to drive. I was only 11, 12, 13 years old. So so the GMB6 was great for me, a real a lot of exposure, and it's thanks to people, especially like Wally McQuaker and Ken Austin, and in the early days it was Nancy Cato and Len Wintour, and all of those people would remember from those early days. But they gave me a chance and encouraged me to perform, and that was fantastic to get on television. And as a result of that, ended up in the contestant on Brian and the Juniors in Melbourne on Channel 7. So one thing led to another.
And I believe while you were in your teens, you formed a band.
Yes, yeah, it was only about 11 and a half, I suppose, 12 years old. There was a lot of different bands around the area that used to play for the dancers, and quite often in the bands around the area it would just be piano, saxophone and drums, usually no bass. And so anyway, a cousin of mine, he could play bass, and anyway we sort of got together with some of the older musicians. And when I say old, I was only 11 or 12, and some of the older musicians around were in their 30s and 40s. And so the band we formed was called the Telstars, and that was quite successful. I'd also worked previously with that with the Black and White Orchestra, just local bands. And then after that, a few years later, formed a band called Red Wing, and did all the dances around the northeast of Victoria, Shepparton, Wangaratta, Beechworth, Myrtleford, everywhere like that. And so that was fantastic, and that took me right up until I'd already resigned from the bank by then. We'll get to the bank story shortly, but and of course then I finished up in 1978 going with Buddy Williams, but we'll get to that too.
And you did talk about after GMV about a Star Quest. Now I think that was 1974 in the Live Artists.
Yes, that it would have been, yes, and by then I was working in the State Savings Bank of Victoria.
Oh.
So when I finished tech school in was sort of the end of 1971, it would have been, yes. I applied for a bank job. Didn't know what I wanted to do because you couldn't really get a job in music, and I didn't. At school I'd done carpentry, plumbing, welding, maths, all the different subjects, and but I had also done commerce course at the school, at tech school. So it was a choice of going on the farm full time or getting a real job with the bank. So I got a job at the State Savings Bank of Victoria, and it was during that time that I got to perform on Star Quest over at Channel 6 once again. So that association with television went on for a lot of years.
And I believe, well, I have read that you taught yourself to yodel while driving to work.
That's right, and that was while I was working at the bank. So the bank was 16 miles away from the farm, yeah. So every day head off in the car and of course drive at the end of the day back home. So I was by myself, good chance to practice yodeling. The other times I practiced yodeling was on the farm, maybe on the weekends when I was driving the tractor. So I don't think the dairy cows were too happy about this strange noise, but it's funny with the yodeling. I'd practice, I'd listen to Elton Britt, Frank Ifield, Wilf Carter, all those different Tex Morton, Buddy Williams in the early days, Slim Dusty in the early days, listening to those yodel songs and absolutely fascinated by it. So I would practice it going in the car, and I just couldn't quite get your tongue around it, so to speak. And then, would you believe, the following day it'd be a little bit easier. So I just kept on practicing, and eventually I learnt. She taught me how to yodel and some of those songs, Chime Bells and all of those, and yeah, there I was by myself in the car where no one else could hear me.
No one else could hear you.
Yeah.
And around about 1977, Wayne, you released an EP, Tonight Carmen.
That's right, I certainly did. In fact, would you believe, Jack, I actually found a copy of it. There we are, Tonight Carmen. It's got 4 songs on there, being an EP. Tonight Carmen, a Marty Robbins hit song, of course, in the early days. The Night Guard is one that Roy Rogers recorded years ago with the Yodel in it.
Yep.
Baby Blue, which I'd learnt from a Jimmy Little record. And I'm a Lonesome Fugitive. Merle Haggard had a hit with that one. So there's the photo. It was taken in Benalla. There we are, 1977. But prior to that, there was a single I released in 1976. I was still working in the bank at that stage, and that little single I recorded in Shepparton, and it had the Green Green Grass of Home on one side, and All I Have to Do Is Dream, one of the Everly Brothers songs, on the flip side. And I used to sell those at the bank for $2 each and sell them to the customers. So my recording career started in 1976. So it's almost coming up to 40 years now since I started recording.
And those 2 releases that you mentioned, did they sell well?
Yes, they did, surprisingly, but having been known for doing the dance band music around town and also working in the bank, I knew a lot of people. So everyone just wanted to get a recording of Wayne Horsburgh at that stage. So that was a good start to my recording career.
And I believe it would have been the early 70s, you made a trip to Tamworth to see
Slim
a yodeler.
Slim Whitman, yeah, you're dead right. And that I have to say probably changed my career, changed my life. Now it wasn't during the festival, during the January festivals. I'd written to a radio announcer in Tamworth, and I said, I'm coming up to have a look at this place. It was during the year. I said, what's on? Thinking there'd be country music on all the time, which, as we know, it's fairly much, in January that we see lots of country music in Tamworth. So it was during the year, and anyway, the radio friend wrote back, a radio announcer wrote back and said, well, look, there's not a lot on, but a guy called Slim Whitman is going to be on in the town hall while you're up here. So I got a ticket to this singer, and I'd heard of him, and I knew he yodeled and everything, but boy, when Slim Whitman walked out on stage and started with Indian Love Call and Casting My Lasso to the Sky and those songs, I was just fascinated. And his rhinestone suit, so dressed up, so smart, so looked fantastic. So that was one of the things that I impressed me so much, and so I bought one of his LPs. And it wasn't too long before I was singing China Doll and Casting My Lasso and some of those songs too. So a big influence on me. And of course I ended up becoming friends with Slim Whitman as the years went by.
Did you meet him after the show?
I don't think I didn't meet him, no, that particular time, no, but I did later on when he came back to Australia, future years, and I ended up years later doing the cover notes for one of his CD releases overseas. So I was very honoured to write my little story about Slim Whitman for one of Slim Whitman's CDs. So yes, it was great, and he very much respected what I did, and I put out a CD, years later with as a salute to Slim Whitman, and so I did get to meet him and his son Byron there a few years later when they were out doing some shows in Australia.
Can you tell us about the talent quest that you entered in Tamworth before you went on to the Buddy Williams show?
Oh yeah, that's right. Oh, you've been doing your homework, Jack, haven't you? Yeah, that was January 1978. I went up to Tamworth. My brother, in fact, took me up there from Benalla. We drove all that way, and virtually pulled up in front of the town hall after the long drive, and I think we stayed somewhere overnight, obviously on the way up, but went down the side of the town hall. I went up the back steps, and gentleman Jeff Brown, happened to be at the top of the steps. I could tell he was probably helping running the show, and I just said, "What's this talent quest that's on?" And he said, "Oh, well, it's the Jamboree." And I said, "Can I go on it?" And he said, "Have you got a guitar?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, go and get it." So I ran back out to the car, come back up, put on a nice shirt, and went in the male vocal section and the yodeling section, and won both of them. So that was an absolute thrill. But before that, in 1976, I'd won a talent quest at Albury, and John Minson was the judge there. So word had got around a little bit from John Minson that there's this Wayne Horsburgh guy from Benalla, and he'd already spoken to Buddy Williams and to Rick and Thel probably in 1977. And that's sort of one thing led to another. I ended up with the choice in 1978 of either going with Rick and Thel or going with Buddy Williams. But boy, did we milk that Talent Quest win in 1978 with Buddy when I toured around Australia with Buddy, because I was the Tamworth gold guitar winner, even though it wasn't a gold guitar, but they were the little statues, which I've still got. They're right here actually. So that was the Talent Quest. So that did me a lot of good. We got a lot of mileage out of that, and of course then just a few weeks later went on the road with Buddy.
And where did you tour with Buddy?
Oh, all over the place, Jack. We started at Tamworth.
Yep.
And worked our way down through New South Wales. And would you believe, after all the farewells at Benalla, saying goodbye, and I finished up with the dance band, said goodbye to my family, everybody, because I was going away. The next show was at Albury, and the next one was at Wangaratta. So I ended up back down. So all the Benalla people came to both of those shows. So I'd only been gone for a week or so, and I was back down there. And through Victoria, all the way through into South Australia. Up through the missions and settlements, up through Woodnadatta, Freegon, Ernabella settlements, and then up into Alice Springs, all the way to Darwin. And then Brian Young had actually got in ahead of us on that particular year with his shows up north and to some of the islands up north of Darwin there, where we were going to go. So Buddy had to reroute a little bit. We come back down to Alice Springs, and then we worked our way up into Western Australia, and all the way down through, and we end up at Whyalla. And then unfortunately Buddy had a heart attack, so I had to put Buddy in hospital. So that was the end of the tour. But I did stay with Grace and Karen Williams there at Whyalla until Buddy was well enough, and drove the trucks and got him back to Tamworth at the end of the season. So we didn't quite finish. We didn't get scheduled shows that we had headed up into Queensland, unfortunately. That we had to cancel a few Queensland ones. Otherwise we would have done virtually all of Australia without Tasmania. Yeah.
And on that particular show, you did tour the Aboriginal communities?
Yes, a lot of them. Hermansburg, Mission. I'm trying to remember all the different ones. I said Freegon, Ernabella. Great experience. Absolutely fascinating. To go to those missions, and the kids just loved Buddy Williams. They would see the trucks coming, in the distance. You'd see the dust. They'd probably see the dust with the trucks, and they knew Buddy Williams was coming, and they'd run all the way out the road, and meet us as we came in, and they just loved the music, and they'd watch us set up. And they'd be all in the front row, all the kids, and it was a wonderful experience for me. And it wasn't easy. It really wasn't. Even though we had caravans to live in, some of the shows we had to do where there might not have been any facilities, we set up on the dirt, ran a petrol generator for the amplifiers, and I mean there was times when the petrol would run out halfway through the show, and you'd have to put your guitar down, run over, and fill it up with petrol, and then come back and start again. So, but it was a great experience for me. But it toughened me up, that's for sure. That's probably one of the hardest years I guess I have had in showbiz, was that particular year. But it did me a lot of good, and Buddy was great, and certainly miss Buddy and Grace. Of course, they're both passed on now, but that certainly got me started.
You ever on the same stage as Tex Morton?
No, I don't think I ever have. I remember Tex and Buddy both being at Tamworth one year when I was up there pretty much probably as a tourist. But I know I had to phone Tex myself and tell him that Buddy had the heart attack in Whyalla.
Oh, okay.
At that stage, so that was about the only time that I actually had personal contact with Tex. But I love Tex's music and certainly honoured his successes. Yeah.
And now after the Buddy Williams show, what happened?
All right, that was the big decision, Jack. That was another huge turning point. There's been big stepping stones in my life. In the 70s, around 75, 76, I'd been just a guest artist, opening act, if you like, 20 minutes on the Ray Kernaghan shows down around the border area, yep. Albury, Tumbarumba, Tumut, and the Sydney guest artist on the Ray Kernaghan show was a lovely lady called Dorothy Barry from the Barry Sisters. So Dorothy had said to me at the time, she said, you should come to the Sydney clubs, sometime. It'd be a good place for you to perform. And I said, oh no, that'd be like going to Las Vegas. So this was probably around 1975, 76. And because I got to be good friends with Ray Kernaghan, and of course Lee was only a kid. All the kids were just little kids back then, and I'd stay at Ray and Pam's place at Albury and do these shows. Anyway, I remember Dorothy saying to me, if you ever decide to come to the Sydney clubs, you give me a call and I'll see what I can do to help you. So I went with Buddy Williams in 1978, and I thought to myself, I've said goodbye to everybody down in Victoria, finished with the band, finished with the bank job, and I thought, what will I do? And I thought, I'll give Dorothy a call. So I phoned Dorothy Barry, and she said, yes, come on up. So 1979, February, I moved to Sydney, and she managed to get one of the best managers that you could think of at the time, Maury Porter, who's the father of Robbie Porter. So Maury, she talked Maury into managing me. Maury was well established. He had his agency, and he looked after the bookings for lots and lots of entertainers. And so Maury managed me for the first 3 years, and thanks to Dorothy suggesting him, I did a lot of shows back in those days with a lot of the well-known acts, and I got quite established on the Sydney club circuit. So it went from there. So I've had 35, almost 36 successful years doing the Sydney clubs.
Great. Now, sometime during the 80s, and you'll be able to clarify this, you appeared on the Reg Lindsay Country Homestead.
That's right, the early 80s, probably around about 80, 81. Yes, Reg got me to fly up to like a lot of other country acts, up to Brisbane. Of course, the earlier Reg Lindsay shows, which were before my time, if you like, were filmed in Adelaide, and they were a lot of the black and white shows, if you like. But no, it was great to go up to Channel 9 and be part of the Reg Lindsay shows, and that was good exposure for me, very much. And when those shows finished, a few years later, I was able to appear on the Lee Conway television shows as well. So once again, it was television exposure, and having had the experience all those years earlier at GMV6 at Shepparton, it was wonderful to be able to use that experience and go on the television.
Now, around 1985, I think you said it was 1985, you recorded an album with Denise Morrison.
That's right, yes. It might have been 1984, I think, but around that time anyway, called Sequins and Satins, Buckles and Breeches. Denise was the Sequins and Satins part, and I was the Buckles and Breeches. It was an album, yes, it was for a company based out of South Australia. Now, the year prior to that, 1983, I'd recorded an album with Desiree Alona Crawford, and that particular LP, I did some of the songs and Desiree did some. That was called I Run Alone, and that was for a company called Gopher Records. And then, yes, then the following year for Country City Entertainment, which was the name of a company from South Australia, based out of Port Pirie, from a lot of radio announcers and business people, put the money together, and so Denise and I recorded this album, and there were some really good tracks on there. Doug Trevor produced the LP, and it was very popular. I know we entered some of the songs in the Gold Guitar Awards in the following January, and I know I got in the finals for male vocal, and Denise got Gold Guitar for one of her songs there too from the album. So it was great.
Excellent.